Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for joining me for this ELL training. My name is Nicole Ellison and I am the ELL coordinator for both OVCA and Insight School of Oklahoma. If you have any questions during this training, feel free to email me at any time at nellison@k12.com. At the end of this recording, there will be a survey for you to complete to confirm completion of this training for the school year. Today we are going to talk about English language learners with some acronyms and vocabulary, how we identify ELL students, some of the testing that they go through, and then some of the supports that we offer at the schools. We will also discuss limited English proficient parents and learning coaches and how we identify and support those families. Why another training when we have so many and it's a busy time of year? Especially when there are only about 30 to 35 students at OVCA and about 5 at ISOK each year identified as ELL. Well, simple. ELL students need an individualized learning environment, so it's important that all staff understand how we identify and support these students. They're just as important as any other student attending our programs. There's quite a few acronyms that go along with English language learners at OVCA and Insight, and I want you to be familiar with these terms. The first two are ELL and EL. ELL stands for English language learner. EL is just English learner. They're the same thing. So just depending on who you're speaking with, they can refer to a student as EL or ELL, and just know it means the same thing. It's a student who is not quite proficient in English and they speak another language primarily. ESL is English second language. So again, this would be a student who speaks another language in addition to English, and English is the second language. The next term is LEP, Limited English Proficient. Generally, that's how we refer to our parents or learning coaches who are limited English proficient. Next, we have our LIEP, or LEAP. That stands for Language Instruction Education Plan. That's a plan that we'll talk about later in this training, but every ELL student has a LEAP written annually. And then last but not least, we have our HLS, our Home Language Survey. Every student has one of these on file. It's a required document for enrollment, and it helps us in the identification process. ELL students. So under federal law, all public schools must screen and identify English language learners in need of assistance. Every student, as I mentioned previously, has a home language survey on file. The home language survey helps identify if English is the native language of the student and if another language is spoken in the home. The ELL coordinator monitors the home language responses to determine who might be considered ELL. After review of the home language surveys, the next step for any positive home language surveys is for the student to be administered a WIDA placement test, also known as the WAPT. In some instances, the student may have previously been identified at their prior school or educational setting. So instead of testing the student again, we would use prior school records for placement. Depending on prior records or current placement testing, the ELL coordinator and operations manager will determine if a student should be marked as ELL, ELL first or second proficient, or bilingual only. If you are interested to know if a student on your caseload that you support is ELL, you may go to TVS and search for that student. Then you may click on Special Programs, and then next, you would check to see if the box next to English as a second language is marked. If it is marked, that would indicate the student is a current year English language learner, which means they are not fully proficient in English in a specific area. I want to note, no staff should mark a student as ELL or English as second language in TVS other than the ELL coordinator or operations manager. We have very specific guidelines to follow established by the USDE and the SDE. At OVCA and Insight, it's very important that we support our identified students. So every student has an annual language instruction education plan written and updated. This plan identifies classroom accommodations the student should receive, testing accommodations. It identifies their current English proficiency as well as their annual goals. We provide resources for the student and the parent. We advocate for the student serving as the liaison between the parent, student, school, and teachers. Oftentimes, there might be a communication barrier or just a misunderstanding for the student, and as they're working on their English proficiency, we work to help that communication and partnership be more cohesive for these families. Each ELL student will receive ongoing tutoring focused on increasing proficiency in the below areas: listening, speaking, writing, and reading. Those are the areas to which ELL students are tested on to identify their proficiency level. So those are the areas we focus on. However, that might, during tutoring, actually be embedded in their curriculum. So the tutor might go into their ELA lessons as they're helping support their English proficiency in comprehension or writing. I mentioned accommodations as a part of the LEAP plan. ELL students may be given accommodations based on the language need for the student in the classroom setting and the testing environment. The ELL tutor will partner and collaborate with the general education and, when necessary, the special education teachers to ensure the appropriate accommodations are being provided. Some other important key things to know here. ELL students take an annual in-person English proficiency assessment called the WIDA 2.0. Now, this is different than that placement test that they take only one time. This test occurs annually in person. The testing window is very similar to spring testing. And once a student obtains proficiency on this annual assessment, then the student would no longer be considered ELL. Instead, the student would be identified as first year or second year proficient. The ELL tutor would monitor the student and collaborate with teachers as needed to ensure the student is continuously successful without needing those additional supports from the ELL program. These students would not be marked in TBS, but we would still monitor them. Some students might speak a second language, but they're proficient in English, therefore considered bilingual only. These students would not be marked as ELL in TDS. LEP, or LEP, Limited English Proficient Parents. Schools must make every effort to identify our limited English proficient parents who may need language assistance. Schools must provide communication when requested by a LEP family in a language they understand. In addition to identifying the parents, we must maintain a list of identified parents as well as services provided. The ELL coordinator will maintain this in SharePoint. If you identify a limited English proficient parent, regardless if that's speaking or reading or writing or listening, please email me, Nicole Ellison, so that one, I can add them to my list so we know who our limited English proficient parents are. But two, so we can track any services that we provide these families. Now, you might run into an instance where the student is proficient in English. Maybe English was their native language. However, the parent is not proficient in English. We still want to serve that parent, regardless if the student is ELL or not. For our limited English proficient parents, we provide resources to them and support them the best we can. One way that we do that is by providing a translator when needed to communicate with the parent. We also can provide translated curriculum or parent guides upon request. We always send the below documents automatically to a parent translated if they've been identified as a limited English proficient parent. And those items can be found here. If there are additional items requested, of course, we would provide those as well. I want you to think about it with me for a second. It's not easy to get parents involved sometimes in our setting, especially those with language issues. But if we don't try, we are not doing all we can to see each student succeed. Just because there might be a language barrier doesn't ever mean the student or parent don't want the best The language barrier doesn't mean the student is lazy or the parent doesn't want the best for the student academically. I've created some resources for you. These resources will help you in your support of any ELL students or limited English proficient parents on your caseload. These QRGs can be found in SharePoint. If you lose them or cannot locate them anytime during the year, please email me and I will promptly get them to you. If you have ideas on how we can better serve these families, I'd love to hear from you. If you have any questions, please contact me at any time throughout the year. And today, don't forget to fill out the survey to get completion credit for this training over ELL. Thank you. Have a great day.